Welcome, flute players. Welcome to 3 tips for octave changes and making jumps in Irish flute tunes. I'm really excited about this one today. I'm always excited, but I'm really excited about this one because this is a request from one of you. So Harry had written in and asked what my thoughts were on changing octaves and making jumps, particularly in tunes, in the context of tunes. And I thought it was a great topic for conversation, and it's something I actually talk about not infrequently with my own students. I actually wrote a whole chapter on tone and intonation and issues like that in my book, Playing Outside the Lines, so I thought it would be a good topic for today. So I'm going to break it down into 3 sections. The first is the science behind octave changes and jumps. What is happening? Why do we need to configure things differently when we're playing down here as opposed to up here? How to do those things. The second is putting that into context in a conjunct motion tune. So conjunct motion tunes are tunes that have notes really close together. They're very linear, they're very horizontal, they're very smooth. The third tip is disjunct motion tunes, putting all these things into practice in disjunct motion tunes. Disjunct motion tunes are tunes that go like this or this or this. And flute players will know those can be a little bit of a beast. So we'll talk about the different kind of things we need to tackle in disjunct tunes and how to put all those things into practice. So the science behind octave changes. It's important to know that when we're playing down here on the range of the flute as opposed to up here on the range of the flute, we need to be doing different things with our bodies, our mouths, everything. So if you caught my video on how to play a great low D, some of these concepts will be familiar. So if you want, you can always hop over and watch that too. There's 3 things we want to think about. The first, we want to think about focusing with our embouchure. The second, we want to think about directing the airstream with our jaw. And the third, we want to think about propelling the airstream with our abdomen. Those things look and feel differently if you're playing low and if you're playing high. So let's talk about the 2 extremes on that spectrum, the octave spectrum, so to speak. The first extreme is a low D, and the second we'll just do a high A. When you play low D, you want to focus your airstream with your upper lips. You want to bear down on your airstream. You want to direct your airstream downwards with your jaw by opening your jaw, open and back, like that awkward yawn face we talked about in the other video. You want to propel the airstream with your abdomen, so really great airstream. That's kind of a fundamental, non-negotiable part of being a flute player. So if we play a low D, I'm going to show you from this angle so you can see what my upper lip looks like. Here's a low D. So it's pretty smooth. I always have a little tuck right here that I've never quite gotten rid of, but it's pretty smooth. And then if I turn to the side, you'll see my jaw's pretty open. So it's that awkward yawning face. If I play a high A, things look different. So here's a high A. So it's more like it's starting to get closer to a kissing face. So when I play a high A, I am focusing with the upper lip, but I'm not bearing flat down in the same way as I did with low D. I'm also starting to engage my bottom lip. So I'm starting to push my lips together this way, kind of squeezing the airstream, giving it a hug. So here's high A again. And then if I turn to the side, the jaw is a little more closed. And I'm going to show you those 2 extremes from the front and the side again. So here's a D and then an A. Like so, and like so. Bonus points if you move your eyebrows when you go up and down. And then I'll turn to the side and I'm going to show you a D, and you should see it back a little bit, my jaw, and then I'll show you an A and you should see my jaw come forward a little bit. So here's D. Here's A. Okay, so those are the 2 extremes that we want to think about. So something we can do to kind of start familiarizing ourselves with that is to do some octave jumps. Some of you may have practiced harmonics before. Those are awesome. Octave jumps can be a friendlier way to kind of get into that. Harmonics can be a little challenging and tricky. Awesome if you're already doing them. So if you do a D, D, D octave jumps, you'll notice I'm going from low to slightly higher embouchure to low, and then you can do the same thing with E. So you're going low, high, low. And you can do that with all of your notes, all the way up to high A, high B. They all have the same fingerings except for D. If you want to, when you go up the octave, if you want to lift this first finger, you certainly can. It's not a requirement. If you play silver flute, you probably are already in the habit of doing that like I do. Great, so you can do those octaves. And then you can practice playing scales. So what we just practiced was, really disjunct motion. That's what that looks like. Those are the two extremes. Now we're going to practice playing a scale where we gradually work from one extreme to the other. So let's do this. Let's do a D scale. Let's go from D, and we're actually going to do a scale plus a couple notes all the way up to A, so we can see kind of the extreme of what that feels like. So remember, when we start on low D, we're going to want focused upper lip, directed airstream with your jaw by dropping open and back, propelling your airstream with your abdomen. As we get higher, you want to start engaging your lower lip, kind of doing this with your lips squeezing together. You want to move your jaw forward and maybe close it just a little to raise the airstream, to direct the airstream upwards. You might find as you go higher, you also need to propel more with your abdomen, so you're propelling a stronger, maybe faster airstream. So let's go through those notes. So we have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A. So let's do that together. So remember, we're starting with low embouchure, low everything. See how that embouchure's changed? So those are the things we need to think about, and hopefully you might have noticed your jaw changing a little bit, maybe propelling your air more as you went higher. So those are the kind of critical things that we need to know. So now let's put it into practice. So tip 2, conjunct motion. The first tune we'll talk about, I think a great example of conjunct motion is the Kesh jig. So one a lot of people know. I have a recording of it if you want to listen to it, and there's free sheet music on my website as well, which I can link to in the description. The Kesh jig is an interesting example because it starts on G. It feels very horizontal, pretty linear. It's pretty okay. And then somehow by the end of the tune, in the end of the B part, you've gotten to a high G. And so somewhere in there, you would have had to transition to a higher embouchure formation, which means you're focusing your embouchure a little differently up here, you're directing a little differently here, you're propelling a little differently here. So playing through the Kesh jig can be a really interesting exercise, and we just practiced it with a scale, like, this is what it feels like to gradually start to get higher and higher and higher and higher, and to do it smoothly and with a little bit of grace, hopefully. So here, let's play the Kesh jig. Again, you can grab music from my website if you don't know it, or hop over to the video and learn it. Links to all of that are in the description below. So here's Kesh. Let's go nice and slow. As you're playing, just keep tabs on where you are, and remember, by the B part, you're going to want to be starting to use a higher embouchure, but let's start low. So, focused upper lip, kind of open jaw, propelling with your abdomen. Maybe don't need to do quite as much because we're just starting on G. So here it is. 1, 2. You should have, hopefully, a little bit of a kissy face going on. So with Kesh, you should be starting here, kind of flat, kind of open, and by the end of it, you should have hopefully migrated to that kind of face and that kind of configuration. So that's something to think about. The best way to practice that is, in my opinion, is to practice your octaves and then also your scales, so you can kind of see, okay, low, high, low, that's what it needs to look like. Then how do I link between low, high, low gradually? And usually what I'm finding is somewhere around D, E, F sharp, high D, E, F sharp. That's where I want to make sure that I'm sort of making changes here so that by the time I get to G, I'm ready. If I try to play G in a conjunct motion tune and I haven't made any of those adjustments gradually as I go up, things will start to crack, things will start to not speak clearly. So that's just kind of what you want to think about. You want to think about, how do I make this transition gradually with grace is essentially the big question. So let's talk about tip 3, which is disjunct motion. And this is where it gets, in my opinion, a little bit trickier and thornier. So disjunct motion is where tunes go low, high, low, high. And they happen a lot in Irish tunes, and it is a challenge for flute players. There's a couple different ways to tackle this. So there's disjunct motion that happens just once when you have to make one big jump and then you're good. Then there's disjunct motion that happens where you're bouncing back and forth quite a bit. And they're kind of different approaches to the two. So I think a really good example of this is actually Cooley's, which is a reel that a lot of people know as well. I also have a video for it. I also have free sheet music. I'll also link to it below. But Cooley's is great because it has a couple examples of each of these types of disjunct motion. So it starts with a pretty big jump from an E to a B. And then in the A part, it has disjunct motion, and then back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then in the B part, it has disjunct motion, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And each of those requires slightly different approaches. So I would definitely recommend, let's play through the tune together, make sure we know it. And if you helps you to look at sheet music, go grab it from my website, and then we'll talk about different parts of it. So here's the tune, nice and slow. Cool. So that is Cooley's. Let's talk about 3 examples. I'm dividing 3 into 3 into 3. So 3 examples. The first is at the very beginning, we have an A to a B. And I do a D pickup, so we have D, E, B. So you'll notice you're starting on your low D if you do the pickup, and you have a very low D embouchure, this kind of focus down, open jaw, propelling, and then you need to jump to a B, and you need to make sure that you start focusing a little bit more with your lower lip. You're doing a little bit more of a kiss on that B, just mwah. And you want to maybe close your jaw just a little bit. You want to propel your air a little bit more to make it up to that B. So that's the embouchure that I just ended with. Okay? And whenever you have a jump like that, either up once or down, I find that just kind of being aware of like, okay, this looks a little disjuncty, and I'm going to have to anticipate the motion that I need to make in order to effectively bridge that jump. And so what that means is when I'm going up to a B, I think, okay, I need to engage this, I need to redirect this as I go up to that B, as I go up to the B. If you try to do it on the B, the B will be gone before you know it. So you want to kind of anticipate that motion. So that's one thing you can practice. The second example in Cooley's, let's find it. That part in Cooley's, which is about halfway through the A part. So in that case, we're jumping from A down to F sharp, down, going back and forth. There's a low D down there. And I think, especially when tunes are played at speed, and this is where I think, people can think to themselves, oh, I've been practicing, octaves and all of this. Why isn't it working? In this situation, because it happens so quickly, I found that you just sort of have to pick a loyalty. You have to pick a side. You don't have time to switch. You have to just choose the side that you think needs a little more help. So you're throwing your weight into the side of the tug of war that looks like they just need one more person, so to speak. In this instance, I think the low notes need a little more help because the higher notes are A's and B's. They're going to come out no matter what you do. Your low notes, like your low D's and F sharps, they might need a little bit more assistance. So in this particular spot, choose a low note formation. So you're going to choose your low D formation. You're going to focus your air with your upper lip down. You're going to direct your air stream downwards with your jaw. You're going to propel here. And if you focus for those low D's and keep your air moving horizontally through, they should come out, and your high notes will come out no problem. So that little phrase, I'm not moving. I'm keeping my low, and all those low notes are kind of barking out, and the high ones are coming out. So that's one way to do that disjunct motion. Conversely, in the B part, that part there, that's pretty disjunct also. We're going from, what is it, E, B, G, B, E, G. Sorry, last note's B. I misspoke. So that's another instance where you can try to switch. Or you can pick a side. So which side in the tug of war do you think needs a little bit of help? In that situation, do you think it's the high notes or the lower notes? I'm going to say it's the high notes because B is the bottom note in that little phrase. It's going to come out. Mid-register notes do tend to come out. If you don't aim for the E's and the G's, they're not going to speak. So for instance, here is that phrase with me aiming for the B and not the high notes. Hear how the high notes are kind of unfocused? It's not great. Here's when I'm aiming for the high notes instead. So I have a little bit of a higher embouchure there. And I think that those are good examples of, yes, you need to understand high versus low. Absolutely. Sometimes you'll need to gradually go between them. Sometimes you'll need to jump. So just to summarize all the examples we had, because there were a lot today. In Kesh, that was a good example of conjunct motion where you need to gradually go from low to high. In Cooley's, in the first two notes, that's a great example of disjunct motion where you quickly make the adjustment as you get high. And then the two other examples in Cooley's, those were good examples of, okay, I do need to understand low and high embouchures, but I need to understand here that I need to choose a side and then I need to stick to it. So the example where we were dealing with low D, picking low D, choosing to throw your loyalty in with low D, and using low D embouchure and trusting that the other notes will come out. And then in the third example in Cooley's with the B part, where we had high E's and low B's, mid B's, high G's, throwing your weight in with those high notes and knowing a high note embouchure will help those high notes speak. So I think that's everything for today. So to summarize everything, we talked about the science behind changing octaves. We talked about conjunct motion tunes and how to inform how to play them using the information about the science of changing octaves to help you direct what you want to do. And then we talked about disjunct tunes and whether or not you make a quick change or whether or not you choose a loyalty and pick a side. And yeah, I think that was everything. So there's a whole bunch of links in the description below to tune recordings and to sheet music, to my book. I want to say thank you to Harry for asking for a video. And I want to wish all of you happy fluting. Keep writing in, and I hope I'll see you soon.